Welcome to Art and Objects Modernism in New Zealand catalogue. This is a catalogue that we're very proud of, and it brings together two very important collections. The collection of long-time collector and dealer and really expert in the area of New Zealand applied arts and design, Rodney Robertson, and the archive of Theo Schoon cave drawings that come to us from a collection in the South Island. All of the items are currently on view at Art and Object, and in the catalogue, of course, which is online, go to auction this coming Wednesday, the 21st of May at 6:30 p.m. And we're now going to take you through some of the special treats, if you like, of New Zealand visual arts and applied arts design history in this catalogue. Theo Schoon holds a really unique and seminal position in New Zealand art history. His relationships with artists such as Dennis Knight Turner and Gordon Walters, through to his impact on photography in the 1950s and 60s, specialist areas such as gourd carving and pounamu carving are really legendary. And his name pops up again and again in any discourse about New Zealand modernism. But it really began here. In 1946, Theo Schoon began this extraordinary project of documenting the original New Zealand Maori art, as he saw it, in the caves of South Canterbury, in the area around Timaru. Schoon's program was to capture these important Maori cave drawings before, in many cases, they disappeared through weathering or some form of destruction. All of the images, photography and documentation in the catalogue come to us from the state of William Vance, who was employed by the Department of Internal Affairs in the late 1940s to effectively manage Theo Schoon in the field. The archive includes dozens of letters that are incredibly illuminating about Schoon's thoughts as to the origins and meaning of the original cave art, which of course was created in some cases centuries before European contact. But what we have today here, of course, are these magnificent cave paintings. The boards are carried by Schoon into the field. He lived rough in a tent on various farms as he travelled around the area and documented taniwha figures, the hunting scenes, other imagery that is very difficult to discern exactly what the subject matter might be. But in many of these images, you can see literally the nascent Maori typology of forms starting to emerge from the Polynesian roots of those initial immigrants to New Zealand 1,000 years or more ago. This is really a very important body of work. Immediately after Schoon travelled to the caves, he contacted his friend Gordon Walters, and the rest, as they say, is history. So what we have here today at Art and Object is an insight into one of the key periods for New Zealand modernism, as for the first time an artist engaged with the art of Aotearoa and saw it as just that, as the original art of New Zealand. I'm going to read you a quote from 1949 by A.R.D. Fairbairn. It says, "Mr. Theo Schoon has spent almost 3 years recording these drawings. In the course of his travels, he has discovered about 3 times as many caves as were previously known. I prophesy that in times to come, his name will be remembered with gratitude by generations that have come to appreciate the full value of these primitive works of art." So a number of key figures in New Zealand visual arts and literary culture really understood the significance of these images that Theo Schoon was documenting. Schoon sent a number of photographs of the cave art to Fairbairn, and Fairbairn set about making lino-cut blocks to create these wonderful fabrics using Schoon's cave art paintings as reference material. This fabric was then used on everything from dresses to lampshades to cushions to fabric for homes. Some of the fabric was also sent, would you believe, to the United Nations shop in the 1950s in New York. But what we have here is very rare, is an example framed up of the Fairbairn fabric, which uses imagery from 2 of the paintings that we have here in the Vance Archive collection. This section of figures here, including what is to be believed to be dog figures, and this kind of 3-fingered, perhaps it's a taniwha figure, difficult to know. But this is really a wonderful connection between the original cave art and, if you like, popular culture of the time and home furnishings. Another member of the Schoon circle was Dennis Knight Turner, and we're very fortunate to have a Dennis Knight Turner cave art painting here, directly referencing and sourced from and influenced by the Schoon cave art. And so it's really interesting to see how quickly and how deeply this project of these key works travelled into the visual arts culture of New Zealand in the 1950s.
Rodney Robertson's collection has been put together over the last 25 years, and Rodney really focused a lot of his collecting on the theme of modernism in New Zealand. The collection was housed in his 1950s batch north of Auckland, and one of the things we've tried to convey in reviewing is the context of how this collection interrelates with itself, because there are various genres covered, from pottery to textiles to furniture to lighting. And one of the things that always struck me visiting his batch in North Auckland was how all those things work so well together. Rodney's collection also comprises a number of collections within the collection, so collections from various potters, and I think none more interesting than this collection of Ted Dutch figures. So Ted Dutch, obviously well known as an artist, but also I think inspired by his first wife Doris Dutch, moved into ceramic art also. And we have this really amazing assemblage of these robotic signaller figures. And Rodney was collecting, I think, probably some of the best examples he could find. So we see in this collection the more standard sort of signaller figure, and then right through to very unusual examples, the large monolithic figure at the back, and even included in this collection is the first ever of the signaller figures, the prototype cardboard example that Ted Dutch made. So moving on from Ted Dutch's work into a potter's work who's equally as interesting, and that's Leo King. Leo King was an aerospace scientist who left that career to move to New Zealand and began a career in pottery. And I think the thing about the Leo King's work is that you do not see many of these pieces coming to market. And it's kind of testament to this collection that these pieces were assembled over a long period of time.
Russell Clark is another artist who holds a dear position in the story of New Zealand modernism. His imagery of the Maori and the Urewera are perhaps his most famous works. He was of course also a war artist in the Second World War. This image here depicts HMS Achilles, the first New Zealand warship to see naval action in the Second World War, the Battle of River Plate of course. This image here from 1938 to 1940 shows HMS Achilles in Wellington Harbour, probably before it's about to set sail for the Battle of the River Plate.
So another artist whose work is well represented in the collection is John Crichton, and with everything from the turned cowrie salad bowl through to very rare pieces like these anodized upright lamp standing beside me, through to a very, very good mosaic table. And then I think the pick of all the pieces of the Crichton selection on the sale is this charger which stands beside me. A number of chargers have come to market over recent years, and indeed Rodney sold many over the years. And of all the ones that he sold, this is the one he chose to retain. I think we can see why. Most of these are quite formal. This one breaks with that tradition of that very formal mosaic structure and has this kind of intersecting serpentine-shaped band running across the tiles in this kind of white tile design. So a really good example in lovely condition of John Crichton's work.
I'm standing here next to one of the more unusual items in the catalogue. This is Colin McCahon's letterbox from 10 Partridge Street in Grey Lynn. This piece has been held for 25 years in the collection of the artist Paul Hartigan, and really what we're talking about here is the power of the signature of one of our greatest artists. It's almost a kind of a Kiwi Duchampian ready-made, in which we have the McCahon script that we recognise instantaneously from so many paintings, here sitting as a receptacle for messages and letters to McCahon in the 1970s, but as a very powerful icon that sits within a conversation around the maker's mark, the signature of the artist.
So also very well represented in the collection is furniture. There's a very broad offering of New Zealand modernist furniture. A few of these chairs, the Bob Roukema for John Jansen designed wingback chairs, have come onto the market in the last few years, but they still are very rare examples, and there is 2 in this sale. And beside it is a more rare item, and that is the Bob Roukema designed dining table and matching set of 6 chairs.
The story of modernism in New Zealand is really of European art movements brought to New Zealand by a wave of immigrants coming to Aotearoa, driven out of Europe by the war. We think of Kakala the architect, Theo Schoon of course, we think of artists such as Ted Dutch, Frank Carpe, and in photography, Frank Hoffman, who came to New Zealand from Prague around the outbreak of World War II and immediately began practicing here, I guess in a way bringing modernist photographic techniques to New Zealand. And what we have here is a suite of fabulous images by Hoffman that date from the late 1940s to the mid-1960s. Hoffman stands, in my opinion, in the very first rank of photographers in New Zealand, and really a unique contributor to the conversation around photography as art. The conversation about modernism in New Zealand is also about the connections between these emigre practitioners and the willing students they found that they were able to mentor and connect with in New Zealand. Here we have an absolutely magnificent, perfect abstract painting by Mervyn Williams. This work, Maxim from 1969, sits in a conversation around pure abstraction and op art. But of course, one of the things that we need to acknowledge when we talk about Mervyn Williams is his relationship with Ted Dutch, who is very much a mentor figure for Mervyn Williams. And Ted Dutch's sense of design and elegant composition very much feeds into the pictorial sensibility of a magnificent abstract work such as this.
So one of the areas that's been neglected by many collectors over the years is the area of New Zealand textiles, and this collection has a really wonderful array of New Zealand textiles, from these New Zealand Maori inspired travel rugs through to kind of interesting, somewhat mad works like this work by Vivian Mountford, and then to sea and sky work, this kind of restful work done in wool. And just to close out our discussion about a piece which doesn't come from Rodney Robertson's collection but is consigned by Lorraine and Patrick Williams from Wellington. I think nothing in the sale conveys what the sale is about more than this piece. First of all, it's a very impressive piece just in sheer scale, but it conveys that idea of modernism just so well. See, New Zealand modernism, in fact, because you have these corros being intersected by these incised concentric bands. I think one of the best pieces of Roy Cowan's salt glaze work to come to market. Do come down and have a look at the sale. It looks good in context, and I will mention also, by way of close, we have another quite different sale going on view tomorrow, and that is the stock and trade of Donald Melville Antiques, for sale next Saturday at his shop in Lake Road, and that covers everything from brass candlesticks to very, very good tea caddies through to European antiques and the finest of English furniture. So that is a sale also not to be missed.